Camille Logan took her only son to the ICU, only to see her billionaire CEO, ex-Richmond Burge, the son's father with his sick wife in the same ward. She tightened her arms around the boy on her hip as the doors slid apart. Her fingers ached from holding him, but she didn't notice until the cold air hit the sweat at the back of his neck. "It's okay, baby," she whispered into his hair. "I've got you. I've got you." Kyrie didn't answer. His cheek was hot against her shoulder, his breath short and quick, like he was trying to drink the air but it wouldn't quite reach him. He was 7, but right now he felt as small as the day she brought him home. A nurse in light blue scrubs hurried toward them, eyes flicking from Kyrie's face to the numbers on the handheld monitor. "Ma'am, we've got him," the nurse said gently. "We're going to take care of him." Camille's feet didn't want to cooperate. Her body knew she had to let go, that he needed more than her arms now, but every instinct screamed to hold on tighter. Kyrie's hand caught the collar of her shirt, dragging weakly. "Mom?" His voice was barely there. "I'm right here," she said, moving with the nurse, refusing to let his hand slip from hers. "I'm not going anywhere, you hear me?" They eased him onto a narrow bed and started rolling him down the hallway. Overhead, the lights blurred in her vision as tears collected but didn't fall. They turned a corner toward the intensive ward, and Camille's world, already off balance, tilted again. He was standing at the central desk, hands braced on the counter, shoulders pulled tight beneath an expensive navy suit. His dark hair was slightly out of place, like he'd pushed his fingers through it too many times. A paper cup of coffee cooled beside him. She knew that profile. The straight line of his nose, the set of his jaw when he was thinking too hard. For 7 years she'd seen that face only in old news articles and the occasional headline she tried not to click. In her memory, in her son's features, Richmond Berger, her ex, her first love, the man who had once promised her a future and then chosen something else. The man who had no idea that the boy on the rolling bed existed. Her steps faltered, her hand slipped from the rail. The nurse glanced back. "Ma'am, you okay?" The sound drew his attention. Richmond turned, irritation and exhaustion in his posture, until his gaze met hers. He froze so completely it was as if the whole corridor stopped with him. "Camille?" he said, just above a whisper, like he could not trust what he was seeing. Her heart slammed against her ribs. 7 years of anger, grief, and stubborn rebuilding crashed together in one dizzying wave. Why here? Why now? You work hard to put certain memories in a box, tape it shut, shove it to the back of the mental closet. You tell yourself you've moved on. You tell yourself you're stronger. Then life opens a door you never wanted to walk through again, and the past walks out wearing the same face, speaking the same name. What would you do if the person who broke your heart was suddenly standing 3 steps away? What would you do if, at the exact moment you were terrified of losing your child, the last man you ever wanted to see again looked at him and something familiar started to click in his eyes? The nurse kept pushing Kyrie toward an open room. Camille forced her legs to move, forced herself to follow, even as she felt Richmond's stare on her back. She tried to focus on the boy, on the way his small chest rose and fell under the thin hospital gown, on the sound of the monitor as the staff attached lines and checked his oxygen. "Stay with me, Kai," she whispered. "We're right here. They're going to help you, okay? You're so brave." His fingers twitched toward her, searching. She caught his hand and pressed it to her lips. In the glass panel across the narrow hallway, another room came into view. A woman lay motionless on the bed, skin pale against the white pillow. Tubes ran from her arms. A machine traced slow, jagged lines across a screen. Camille recognized her from the same articles that used to sting more than she would admit. Brittany Gottlieb, the philanthropist, the match the world had been told was perfect for the powerful executive, the woman whose engagement announcement had shattered everything Camille thought she knew. Now she looked small. A ring glinted faintly on her finger as a nurse adjusted her blanket. 2 rooms, 2 beds, 2 lives hanging in that thin space between hope and fear. Richmond stepped up beside Camille, leaving a careful distance between them. Up close, he looked older than the last headline she'd seen. There were new lines at the corners of his eyes, a tiredness that no tailored suit could hide. "The doctors say she had a complication," he said hoarsely, nodding toward his wife through the glass. They're still trying to stabilize her. Kamel's throat tightened. I'm sorry, she said quietly. His gaze flickered to Kyrie, then back to her. What about? His voice trailed off, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. My son, she said, the words firm even as her hand trembled around the railing. He woke up and couldn't breathe. They think it might be his lungs or an infection. They're still running tests. Your son, Richmond repeated slowly. His attention shifted fully to the boy on the bed, the hair that matched his, the familiar shape of the nose, the small crease between the brows that had nothing to do with fever and everything to do with genetics. How old is he? He asked, eyes never leaving Kyrie's face. Camille felt the floor tilt again. For 7 years she had carried this answer alone. Every birthday candle, every scraped knee, every lonely night had been theirs, just the two of them. 7, she said at last, her voice barely more than breath. He's 7. The number landed between, with a weight she could almost feel. Richmond's jaw tightened. His fingers curled slowly into a fist at his side. He finally looked at her, really looked, and she saw the exact second the math started lining up in his mind. A woman who once asked him to choose her and walked away when he didn't. A boy who looked like him in all the ways that mattered. 7 silent years. Maybe you're wondering, sitting wherever you are watching this unfold, if you were Camille, would you tell him the truth right here, right now, with your child hooked up to monitors and his wife fighting for her life across the hall? Would you lay 7 years of secrets on a man who already looks like he's standing on the edge? Or would you protect yourself and your son a little longer? If you were Richmond, what would hurt more? The fact that a child exists, or the fact that you missed his first word, his first step, his first dad? And what about Kyrie, that little boy who didn't ask for any of this? His whole life is about to tilt on a hinge he doesn't even know is there. A woman who chose to raise a child alone rather than compete with boardrooms and headlines. A man who chose power, stability, and a carefully shaped image. A 7-year-old caught in the gap between two very different kinds of love. Here, in this bright, quiet corridor between one room and the next, everything they thought was settled is about to be questioned. Would speaking up in this moment save her son in ways that go beyond medicine, or tear apart 3 lives at once? If you believe life has a way of bringing truth back when we least expect it, tap the like button and subscribe to Mr. Williams' Storytime, because stories like this only get deeper from here. The first time Camille Logan saw Richmond Burge, she didn't think billionaire. She thought tired. The ballroom was full of motion and sound, laughter curling over string music, glasses clinking, shoes shifting against polished floors, but he stood oddly apart from it. Not isolated exactly, just separate, as if the room moved around him instead of with him. Camille had been near the east wall, balancing her employer's drink in one hand while navigating a tablet in the other. She was supposed to feel lucky to be there. That was what everyone told her. The firm she interned for had landed an invitation to present a sustainability-focused design proposal to potential investors, and somehow her boss had decided she should come along. You're young, he'd said. You'll add energy. What that really meant was she fetched things, carried devices, and smiled politely while people talked past her. She had just turned toward the refreshments table when she collided with someone moving in the opposite direction. The impact was small but badly timed. Her plate tipped, finger food scattered across the carpet. Oh my gosh, Camille said quickly, heat rushing to her face as she crouched to recover what dignity she could. I'm so sorry. I swear I'm not usually this clumsy. Actually, that's a lie. I am. It's consistent. A soft laugh came from above her. Not amused, not irritated. Human. I think the carpet will survive, the man said. It's seen worse. She looked up. That was when she noticed him properly. Not the suit, though it fit perfectly. Not the confidence, though it hovered just beneath his expression. What caught her was the way his eyes held hers without sliding away, without scanning the room for someone more important. I was looking where I was going, he added gently, so we can split the blame. Camille smiled despite herself. Deal. As she stood, balancing the tablet against her hip, his eyes flicked down briefly. You worked on the solar terrace layout, he said. She blinked. I'm sorry, the mixed-use model your firm presented at 4, he continued, with the adaptive shading on the residential side. That was your section, wasn't it? Her surprise must have shown. You watched that? He nodded. You disagreed with your project lead about reducing the communal green space. Her mouth opened slightly. You noticed that too? I did, he said. You were right. Something steadied inside her chest at that. It wasn't praise, it was recognition. I'm Camille, she said, extending her hand. Camille Logan. He took it, firm grip, lingering half a second longer than necessary. Richmond Berger. The name landed, heavy and immediate. She'd heard it 100 times before. Articles, interviews, board announcements. Oh, she said, blinking once. Right, you're... He smiled wryly. Yes, that one. For a moment neither of them moved, as if acknowledging the distance his name normally created. Then he tilted his head slightly. Walk with me? She hesitated. I'm technically on duty. Then we'll walk slowly, he said. So it still counts. Against her better judgment, she laughed. They moved along the perimeter of the room, away from the clusters of conversation, away from the practiced smiles and business cards. I didn't expect anyone to notice my argument, she admitted. Interns aren't supposed to have opinions. I prefer them, he replied. They aren't rehearsed. Camille studied him as they walked. Up close, she saw the tension beneath his composure, the faint line between his brows, the way his shoulders only relaxed when they reached a quieter corner. You don't enjoy events like this, she said without thinking. He blinked. Is it that obvious? Only if you're looking, she said. He considered that, then smiled. You might be dangerous, I've been told. They didn't exchange numbers that night. They didn't make promises. They simply talked. About cities that felt oversized, about buildings that tried too hard, about the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who expected something from you. By the time the evening ended, Camille realized something unsettling. For the first time all night, she felt like she belonged. They started with coffee. Not a grand invitation, not a formal meeting, just a message the next afternoon that read, You mentioned a place near your office that gets the espresso right. Could you prove it? She almost didn't answer, almost talked herself out of it. But curiosity won. The cafe was small, tucked between offices, with uneven tables and windows that rattled when buses passed. Richmond showed up without security, without a suit jacket, hair slightly rumpled from wind. You trust this place? He asked, eyeing the menu. I trust the barista, she replied. That's the real test. They talked for an hour, then 2. About design, yes, but also about exhaustion, expectation, the strange pressure of being watched while feeling invisible. I don't usually get to talk like this, he admitted, stirring his cup long after the coffee cooled. People tend to come into conversations with me already convinced they know who I am. And they're wrong? Not entirely, he said, but incomplete. She nodded slowly. That happens to me too, just with fewer cameras. He smiled, something loosening in his face. You can connect with someone quickly when neither of you is pretending, when there's no performance required. Their coffee turned into walks, walks into dinners, dinners into texts sent too late at night when honesty felt easier. He asked her things no one else did. What would you build if nobody was watching? What kind of life feels real to you? She told him about her dream of designing places that didn't intimidate the people who lived in them, about making spaces that felt warm instead of sharp. He told her about the pressure of carrying decisions that affected thousands of people, about choosing stability over instinct more times than he could count. One evening, in his apartment overlooking the city, he leaned back on the couch, tie loosened, shoes kicked off, and stared at the ceiling. Sometimes I wish everything could be quiet, he said. Camille sat beside him, legs tucked beneath her. Quiet scares people, she said. It means there's nowhere to hide. He turned his head toward her. You don't scare me. That was when the line shifted, when something mutual settled between them. Not urgency, not fantasy, intention. Their first kiss didn't come with fireworks. It came late, after conversation tapered into silence, after the city lights blurred into something soft beyond the window. He reached for her hand first, tentative, waited. When she didn't pull away, he leaned in slowly, lips brushing hers like a question rather than a declaration. It was careful, controlled, as if both of them understood how rare it was to want something without conditions. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. This complicates things, she murmured. He smiled faintly. Most things worth keeping do. They tried to be practical. At first, keeping their lives separate where they could, avoiding public events, choosing quiet moments instead of grand gestures. But affection deepens even when you resist it. He canceled plans sometimes, and she learned not to take it personally even when it stung. She challenged him when he retreated into strategy instead of truth. They argued, softly at first, then more directly. "What happens when people find out?" she asked him one night. He hesitated just a beat too long. "I don't know," he admitted. She searched his face. "I don't need promises," she said. "I need honesty." He took her hands then, held them like something fragile. "I want this," he said. I just don't know where it fits yet." Fear rarely announces itself loudly. It whispers, it delays, it asks for more time. Love rarely ends because people stop caring. It ends because fear speaks louder. When the headlines started, Camille pretended not to care. When the charity events paired Richmond with Brittany Gottlieb, she ignored the comments. The photos. "It's optics," he told her. "Nothing more." "Then why does it feel like less?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. That was when she understood. Not that he didn't love her, but that love alone wasn't enough to outweigh everything else. The foundation had been real, the connection undeniable, but the cracks had begun long before either of them wanted to admit it, and neither of them yet understood how permanent those cracks would become. They didn't fight about feelings at first. They fought about schedules, calls that got pushed an hour later, dinners interrupted by messages Richmond didn't read out loud, evenings that began with an apology and ended with him asleep on her couch, phone still glowing in his hand. Camille tried to tell herself it was normal. He ran a company that touched half the city. Decisions didn't stop just because he cared about her. She had known that when she stepped into this, but knowing something and living inside it were two different things. One night, as rain traced slow lines down his apartment windows, she watched him tighten his tie in the mirror instead of loosening it. "Do you have to go?" she asked from the doorway. He didn't turn around. They added another dinner. Investors flew in last minute. "You said tonight was ours." "I know." His voice was calm, practiced. "I'll make it up to you." She crossed her arms, leaning against the frame. "When?" He finally met her eyes through the reflection. For half a second, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Soon," he said. Soon became the word that followed everything. Soon, after this quarter. Soon, when the board relaxed. Soon, when things weren't so delicate. Camille nodded, even though something inside her tightened each time she heard it. She didn't want him smaller. She didn't want him to fail. She just wanted to know where she belonged when the pressure rose. The boardroom entered their relationship before she ever saw it. Richmond didn't complain openly, but the weight showed up in small ways. The crease between his brows stayed longer. He checked headlines before checking the time. When his phone buzzed late at night, his body tensed before he even looked at the screen. One evening, curled together on the couch, she traced circles idly on his wrist. "You don't talk much about them," she said. "The people who make the decisions with you, they're not interesting," he replied. "That's never been your standard." He sighed. "They want predictability, stability, no surprises." Camille smiled faintly. "You sound like a brochure," he huffed once, humorless. "That's not far off." She shifted, propping herself up on one elbow. "What do you want?" The question caught him off guard. "I want the company to survive," he said slowly. "I want what I've built not to collapse because of a bad call. That's not what I asked." He looked at her then, really looked. "I want room to breathe," he admitted. "I want something that doesn't feel like it has 12 sets of eyes on it." She reached for his hand. "Then why does this feel like the one thing you're most careful with?" "Because you're the one thing I can lose," his silence answered. The first time Camille heard Brittany Gottlieb's name out loud, it wasn't from a screen. It was from Richmond himself. "They want me to attend a fundraiser next week," he said one evening, dropping his jacket over the chair. "Joint event, high visibility." She glanced up from the counter. "Okay. It's hosted by a foundation run by one of the families that backs 3 of our largest expansions." She waited. "Brittany Gottlieb chairs it," he added. Camille had seen the name before. Elegant profile photos, charitable headlines. Nothing scandalous, nothing sharp. "And," she prompted, "and they'd like us to be Friendly, he said carefully. Seen together. Her jaw tightened slightly. Friendly like standing near each other, or friendly like framed by every camera in the room. He exhaled. The second one, there it was. Not betrayal, not romance, strategy. So you're being asked to look available, she said. I'm being asked to look aligned, he corrected. She studied him. Does she know? She knows what she needs to know, he said. It's not personal. It never is, Camille replied quietly, turning back to her work. At the event, Camille stayed home. Richmond sent a photo halfway through the evening, him and Brittany side by side, polite smiles, nothing intimate. Still, the image settled uncomfortably beneath Camille's ribs. It wasn't jealousy that hurt. It was the reminder that his world required him to perform even when he didn't want to. When the articles followed, small mentions at first, then louder speculation, he brushed them off. People love stories, he said. They fill gaps with nonsense. Camille nodded, but the gaps he was allowing felt wider each week. They argued that night for the first time with raised voices. It feels like you're already halfway gone, she said. That's not fair, he shot back. I'm here, aren't I? You're physically here, she replied. But every important part of you is still answering to someone else. He dragged a hand through his hair. I don't know what you want from me. I want you to choose, she said. He stared at her. It's not that simple. Nothing is, she replied. But some things still require an answer. Brittany entered their lives gradually, without ever knocking on Camille's door. She's good at what she does, he said once. She's intelligent. Grounded. Camille heard what he wasn't saying. She fits, Camille replied. His silence confirmed it. Still, she refused to see Brittany as a rival. That narrative would have been easier, but it wouldn't have been true. Brittany wasn't intruding. She was being placed, and Richmond was letting it happen. The pressure increased when expansion talks approached final stages. Richmond's name appeared everywhere. Analysts speculated endlessly. Stability became the word of the year. One night, after Richmond canceled yet another dinner, Camille didn't wait for him to apologize. When were you going to tell me? She asked as he walked in. He paused. Tell you what, that the board wants you married, she said flatly. Not tomorrow, not officially. Eventually, his face closed off. They haven't said that. They don't have to, she replied. They're telling you with every move they make. He sat heavily on the couch. They want reassurance, and I don't offer that? You do, he said quickly, just not to them. She swallowed. Then say it, out loud. To someone besides me. He hesitated, just for a moment. But it was enough. You're asking me to upend everything, he said. Publicly, his voice dropped. That kind of honesty has consequences. She met his gaze, steady. So does silence. They were both tired by then, not angry, not cruel, just worn down by opposing fears. You don't understand the risk, he said. I understand it perfectly, she replied. I just don't believe love should always come last. The night the headline appeared, Camille found out the same way everyone else did. A message from a coworker, a link, one sentence. She stared at the screen, waiting for it to change. It didn't. He called within the hour. I was going to tell you, he said. When? She asked. After the announcement. She laughed once, sharp and quiet. So never, it's more complicated than, say her name, she interrupted. Say you chose her. Silence stretched between them. I made a decision to protect what I've built, he said finally, to keep everything steady, and I was the unstable thing, she said softly. That's not what I meant, but it's what happened. He begged her to understand. She told him she already did. Understanding didn't soften the blow. It clarified it. She hung up before he could make another promise he wouldn't keep. Love rarely collapses in one catastrophic moment. It erodes through hesitation, through waiting too long to be brave. The degradation wasn't loud, it was careful, and by the time either of them realized what had been lost, the choice had already been made. Camille found out on a Tuesday, not during a dramatic moment, not at night, not when she was already emotional. It was an ordinary morning, which somehow made it worse. She was standing in her kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, coffee dripping too slowly from the machine. Her laptop sat open on the counter, a folder of unfinished design revisions blinking patiently on the screen. The radio murmured low in the background, something cheerful and forgettable. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She ignored it at first, humming absently as she reached for a mug. The third buzz came fast, sharp, insistent. She frowned and picked it up. A text from a coworker. "Did you see this?" Below it, a link. Camille's thumb hovered for half a second. She didn't know why her chest tightened. Maybe she did, and just didn't want to admit it. She tapped. Billionaire CEO Richmond Berge, engaged to philanthropist Brittany Gottlieb. The room felt suddenly very quiet. Her coffee mug slipped slightly in her hand, hot liquid sloshing over the rim and onto her skin. She barely noticed the sting. She stared at the screen, scanning the words again and again, waiting for her eyes to rearrange them into something else. Engaged. The word didn't wobble. It stayed exactly where it was. Her phone buzzed again. Another coworker, then another. "I'm so sorry, are you okay? I thought you two were..." She turned the phone face down on the counter. For a moment she just stood there, breathing shallow, one hand braced against the sink. The radio kept playing. The coffee machine finished its cycle with a soft hiss. Life apparently was continuing on schedule. The photo beneath the headline showed Richmond in a dark suit, one arm angled just enough toward Brittany to suggest permanence. She leaned into him lightly, composed, smiling. It wasn't a candid shot, it was intentional. Approved. Camille felt something inside her go utterly still. Not rage, not shock, finality. She didn't cry right away. She cleaned the spilled coffee with mechanical care. She shut down her laptop. She sat at the small kitchen table and folded her hands in front of her. This, she realized distantly, was what it felt like to be edited out. Her phone rang an hour later. She let it ring twice before answering. "When?" she asked. A beat. After things settled, she closed her eyes. So after the one thing that would make it impossible to say no. "That's not fair," he said quickly. She laughed once. It surprised both of them. "You always say that when you know it is," she replied. "How long?" "How long what? How long have you known this was coming?" she asked. "How long have you been planning to marry her?" Silence. "Months," the silence said, even before he did. "Months," he admitted. Her hand tightened around the phone. "So every time you told me you needed more time..." "I wasn't lying," he cut in. "Things were complicated. The timing. You stood in my kitchen," she said softly, "and told me you wanted a future with me. I meant it. Did you?" Her voice didn't rise. It thinned. "Or did you mean you wanted me to wait while you decided which version of your life felt safer?" "Camille, listen." "No," she interrupted. "You listen." He stopped. "I asked you for clarity," she said. "Not promises, not speeches, just honesty. And you gave me space to fill with hope while you made choices that erased me. That's not what I wanted," he said hoarsely. "But it's what you did." He exhaled. "The board made it clear. This partnership secures funding, expansion, public confidence. Everything stays steady. And I destabilize things?" she asked. "That's not what I said. It's what you chose." The word sat there unadorned, undeniable. "I thought I was protecting something bigger than us," he said. She swallowed. "And I thought love counted for something more than convenience." "It's not convenient," he snapped, then stopped himself. "This isn't easy for me." She looked down at the faint coffee stain on the table. "You don't get to tell me how hard this is for you." He went quiet. "I asked you once," she continued, "to say out loud that you wanted me. To someone who mattered. You couldn't do it. That was your answer." "I was afraid," he admitted. She nodded slowly, and fear won. She didn't scream at him. She didn't accuse him of cruelty or manipulation. The truth was simpler. He had loved her. He had just loved control more. "I hope she makes you feel safe," Camille said at last. "Cam." "I do," she insisted. "I hope you never have to wonder where you stand." She hung up before he could respond. The grief came later. It came in waves that didn't announce themselves, in the way the city felt too sharp, in the way familiar places suddenly carried too many memories. She stopped checking her phone for him after the third day. She avoided the news for a week, then a month. The engagement, she learned, was celebrated everywhere. People called them a perfect match, a power couple, a tasteful story. Camille moved through her days quietly, went to work, came home, slept, ate when she remembered to. There were nights she sat on the floor of her apartment, back against the couch, and let herself feel it fully. Not just the loss of him, but the loss of what she thought they were building. Grief isn't loud at first. It's heavy. It presses in until simple things feel exhausting. She didn't hate him. That was the cruelest part. She understood him. Understanding didn't make the injustice hurt any less. When people say betrayal destroys trust, they often imagine lies, affairs, secrets uncovered. Sometimes betrayal is cleaner than that. Sometimes it's telling the truth, but too late. Camille never called him again, not to argue, not to remind him, not to ask why she hadn't been enough. She chose absence instead, and in doing so she stepped into the loneliest moment of her life, one defined not by drama, but by the quiet knowledge that the past was closed, and whatever came next would have to be built without him. Camille noticed the change before she wanted to believe it. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden sickness, no sharp sense of foreboding, just a quiet delay. She stood in the bathroom one morning, toothbrush paused midair, counting in her head like she had twice already. The dates didn't line up. She told herself stress did strange things, heartbreak rewired routines, sleep came and went unpredictably. Appetite followed. She went to work anyway, sat through a meeting about zoning limitations, nodded at the right moments, sketched clean lines on paper while something inside her drifted elsewhere. By the afternoon, the thought wouldn't leave her alone. Still, she didn't rush to confirm it. There are truths people hesitate to meet head-on, not because they're unclear, but because they're too clear, too capable of rearranging an entire life with one quiet word. She bought the test on her way home, slipping it between a loaf of bread and a carton of milk as if anonymity might soften whatever waited inside that small white box. That night, she set it on the bathroom counter and stared at it for a long time. She thought of Richmond's voice when he said her name. She thought of the headline. She thought of how long it had been since she'd cried. When she finally took the test, she didn't sit down. She leaned against the sink, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the wall rather than the counter. The result appeared faster than she expected, positive. The word didn't shout, it simply existed. Camille lowered herself onto the edge of the tub, breath shallow, one hand pressed to her stomach as if the gesture alone might make sense of everything. Pregnant. A new life forming quietly inside her, while the old one still hadn't finished breaking apart. Her first instinct was to reach for her phone, not to call Richmond, but to stop herself from doing it. She could already imagine the conversation, his shock, his sudden focus, the way responsibility would snap into place alongside calculation. She could picture the meetings it would require, the questions, the pressure that would return sharper this time. She pressed her palms flat against the cool tile floor and tried to breathe. This was not information. It was a turning point. She didn't tell anyone that night. She lay awake instead, one hand resting over her midsection, listening to the distant hum of traffic. For the first time since the engagement announcement, her thoughts weren't centered on loss. They were centered on protection. The days that followed stretched her in directions she hadn't anticipated. At work, she caught herself drifting, pencil hovering above paper, as she imagined futures that branched and twisted in ways no blueprint could contain. At night, she argued with herself in the quiet. You should tell him. You should wait. You should protect your child. You're not allowed to decide. That alone. She made lists that dissolved before she finished them. Reasons to tell him, reasons not to. If she told him, the child would never be a secret, would have resources, stability, access to everything she couldn't provide alone. If she told him, the child would be public in a way that felt frightening, examined, structured around expectations she herself had never accepted easily. If she didn't tell him, the child would be hers in a way that was simple, safe, free from negotiation, but also without a father. The word carried weight whether she liked it or not. She imagined her future child someday asking questions she might not be ready to answer yet. She imagined Richmond's face when he realized what the timing meant. And then she imagined something else, quieter, more unsettling, resentment, not now, not even soon, but years later when sacrifices piled up and exhaustion wore down good intentions, when she might look at her child and wonder whether she'd taken too much on alone. That thought scared her more than anything. Camille wasn't afraid of struggle. She was afraid of blame. The choice clarified itself slowly, not as certainty, but as resolve. She would not tell him, at least, not now. This child would not enter the world as a concession or a complication. If she chose to raise this baby alone, it would be because she believed love could be enough without permission. She rested her hand against her stomach and whispered, quietly, as if the walls might remember the promise, "I will protect you." Weeks passed. Her body changed in subtle ways. Food tasted different. Exhaustion crept in unannounced. She told her sister first, over coffee that went cold between them. "You don't have to do this alone," her sister said immediately. "I know," Kamel replied. "I just need to know I can—" She didn't say Richmond's name. She didn't have to. When the doctor confirmed the pregnancy, handed her a grainy image that showed little more than possibility, Kamel felt something settle inside her. Fear didn't vanish. It rearranged itself around purpose. She stopped replaying old arguments in her head, stopped worrying about whether she had been enough. This wasn't about that. It was about what she would become next. The birth happened on a quiet morning. No cameras, no announcements, just effort, pain, and the grounding presence of women who spoke calmly as if guiding her through something ordinary, even though it felt anything but. When the crying finally came, loud and insistent, Kamel laughed through tears she hadn't realized had been waiting. They placed the baby on her chest, warm and wriggling, his features red and scrunched in protest. She touched his cheek with reverence, tracing the line of his nose, the shape of his mouth. When he stilled briefly and opened his eyes, something lodged deep in her chest. They were familiar eyes, not identical but close enough to stir memory. She didn't retreat from the recognition. She accepted it. This child carried more than one history, but his future would not be dictated by reluctance or fear. "What's his name?" the nurse asked softly. Kamel didn't hesitate. "Kyrie," she said. The name felt right, grounded, gentle. Kyrie Logan. When the nurse wrote it down, Kamel kissed her son's forehead. "You're not something I hid," she whispered. "You're something I chose." The weeks that followed were humbling. Night feedings blurred into dawn. Worry surfaced over things she'd never considered before. She learned the sound of his breathing while he slept, learned to calm him with the steady rhythm of her voice. She built routines around presence, around showing up, around consistency. Sometimes in the quiet, doubt returned. She wondered whether honesty should have outweighed caution, whether independence was bravery or avoidance. But then Kyrie would curl his small fingers around hers, trusting without question, and the doubt softened. Protection isn't the absence of truth, it's the decision of when the truth is safe. Kamel knew the choice she'd made wasn't flawless. None are. It was rooted in fear, yes, but also in love, fierce enough to stand alone if it had to. And in those early months, as she rocked her son in the dim light of the apartment, she believed, truly believed, that love might be enough. Kamel learned quickly that quiet resilience didn't look heroic. It looked like mornings that started before sunrise and nights that never quite ended. It looked like reheating coffee 3 times and never finishing the cup. It looked like budgeting down to dollars and choosing which bills could wait an extra week. She moved out of the apartment she'd shared with Memories and into a smaller place across town. Thin walls, creaky floors, but affordable. She told herself it was temporary. Everything was temporary when you were building from scratch. Freelance work filled the gaps her salary couldn't. She took projects other people passed on. Late revisions, tight deadlines, designs that required compromise instead of vision. And yet when Kyrie was born, something inside her sharpened instead of breaking. She didn't resent the work. She organized her life around one central truth. He needed her steady more than he needed her successful. They developed routines that belonged only to them. Morning walks with him tucked against her chest, pointing at passing buses as if they were miracles. Evenings on the floor with blocks and crayons spread everywhere, the television muted because neither of them missed it. Some nights were hard. Kyrie cried without a clear reason. Her arms ached from holding him. Doubt crept in during the quietest hours. But every morning, he woke up smiling at the sound of her voice. That was enough to keep going. As Kyrie grew, Kamel learned the language of his curiosity. He asked questions in clusters, one tumbling into another. Why is the sky different colors? How do buildings stay standing? Where do roads go when they end? She answered what she could. When she couldn't, she admitted it. "I don't know," she'd say, "but we can figure it out." That phrase became their shared promise. By the time he was 4, Kyrie loved drawing. It started with circles that were supposed to be people and lines meant to be roads. Then squares appeared, stacked, lopsided, complicated. "Look, Mom," he said one afternoon, holding up a page covered in careful lines. "This one has windows everywhere so nobody feels stuck." She swallowed past the sudden tightness in her throat. "That's a good idea," she said. "People don't like feeling stuck." He nodded seriously. "That's why I put a slide. For emergencies." She laughed, letting the sound fill the room. They didn't have much, but what they had was theirs. Birthdays were celebrated, with homemade cakes and candles that never quite stood straight. Holidays were small but deliberate. Paper decorations on the walls, music playing too loud, laughter echoing off bare spaces waiting to be filled. Camille marked milestones quietly. First words, first scraped knee, first day of school. She stood outside the classroom that morning longer than necessary, watching Kyrie sit cross-legged on the rug, listening intently to the teacher as if this moment mattered more than anything else. He looked back once, searching the room. When he spotted her, he smiled and waved. Her chest warmed in a way no achievement ever had. Single motherhood wasn't noble. It was practical. It demanded clarity. Camille learned to be decisive. There was no one else to defer to, no one else to blame. If a day went wrong, she adjusted. If a night was hard, she recovered by morning. She became fluent in showing up. Kyrie noticed. One rainy evening, when thunder rattled the windows harder than usual, he climbed into her bed without asking. "Is the house gonna break?" he murmured. She wrapped an arm around him. "No, we're safe." "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm here," she replied. "That's how you know." He relaxed instantly. Love, she realized, wasn't loud reassurance. It was consistency. By the time Kyrie turned 6, the question arrived. It came quietly, without accusation. They were sitting on the couch, knees touching, watching a cartoon neither of them was really paying attention to. "Mom?" he asked. "Yes?" He hesitated. She felt it before she saw it. "Do I have a dad?" Her breath caught, not sharply but deeply, like stepping into cold water. She turned the television off and faced him fully. "What made you ask?" she said, giving herself a moment to steady. "Some kids at school were talking," he replied. "They were doing a thing for Father's Day." He studied her face, eyes thoughtful, not wounded. Camille pulled him gently into her lap, just as she had when he was smaller, even though his legs now dangled awkwardly against the couch. "There are lots of different kinds of families," she said carefully. "Some kids live with 2 parents, some with 1, some with grandparents. What matters is that the people who are there care for you." He nodded slowly. "But do I have a dad was not really the question. Am I missing something was." "You have me," she said, holding his gaze, "and I will always show up for you." "Always?" he asked. "Always," she repeated, without hesitation. He leaned his head against her shoulder, considering. "Okay," he said simply. That was enough for him. She sat awake long after he fell asleep that night, staring at the ceiling. She wondered whether the truth would hurt him one day, whether protection now would create questions later she might not be able to answer. But then she remembered the weight of his trust, how easily he accepted her words. She chose again to honor that trust. The years layered themselves into memory. Science projects built on the kitchen table, late-night fevers soothed with cool cloths and whispered promises, school plays where Kyrie waved once from the stage just to make sure she really was watching. She never missed those moments. When work pulled at her attention, she recalibrated. When deadlines loomed, she worked after bedtime. Exhaustion became familiar but manageable. She carried it with purpose. Kyrie grew into a gentle boy, quick to offer help, slow to anger, curious in ways that surprised teachers. One afternoon, she found him sitting beside a classmate in the park, listening as the other child cried quietly. "Why aren't you playing?" she asked afterward. He shrugged. He needed someone to sit with him. Camille blinked back tears she hadn't anticipated. Where kindness comes from is rarely complicated. It grows in places where someone felt safe enough to learn it. 7 years passed this way, not without struggle, not without moments of doubt, but with intention, with presence, with love that showed up every day, even when it was tired. Camille didn't build a perfect life. She built a real one. One evening, as Kyrie lay on the floor coloring yet another impossible building, she watched him from the kitchen and felt something quiet solidify inside her. No matter what the future asked of her, she had given him something unshakable. And if you believe showing up matters more than titles, share this story with someone who raised you right. Richmond didn't speak again for a long time. He stood at the glass, hands folded tightly in front of him now, not pacing, not posturing, just watching. The boy's chest rose and fell in rhythm with the machine, each motion slight but steady. I built an entire life on being 3 steps ahead, he said at last, planning for outcomes, covering risks, making sure nothing caught me unprepared. He exhaled, a sound edged with disbelief. And the most important thing I never planned for is right there. Camille didn't respond. She didn't need to. This wasn't her confession to make. I failed, Richmond continued, not because I didn't know better, but because I knew and still chose comfort over courage. He looked at her then, not pleading, accounting. I can't undo that, he said. I know that. What I can do is stop pretending it didn't cost anyone but me. That mattered, not as redemption, but as accuracy. Camille nodded once. Across the hall, movements stirred. A nurse stepped into Brittany's room, adjusting a monitor, checking a chart. Brittany's head shifted slightly on the pillow, brows knitting as if surfacing from a deep place. She's waking up, Richmond said quietly. Camille felt a strange tightening in her chest. Not envy, not resentment. Recognition. Do you want me to step away? She asked. He shook his head. No, this is already complicated enough without pretending it isn't. They waited. When Brittany's eyes opened fully, confusion flickered across her face before she focused on Richmond. Relief followed immediately, raw, unguarded. You're here, she murmured. Of course, he said, moving closer. He touched her hand carefully, as if unsure where he was allowed to exist now. She swallowed. The nurse said there was something else happening nearby. Richmond glanced toward Camille, then back to his wife. There is, he said, but there's time. Brittany studied his face. You're shaken. Yes, he admitted. I am. That honesty at least required no negotiation. They spoke quietly, fragments Camille didn't fully hear and didn't strain to. She watched instead, the way Brittany's expression softened, then tightened gently with concern as she followed his gaze across the hallway. Brittany turned her head just enough to see Kyrie's room. That's a child, she said. Yes, Richmond replied. Something passed between them, not suspicion, awareness. Brittany looked back at Richmond, then at Camille, reading the room with the clarity of someone who had lived in public life long enough to sense truth without needing the details spelled out. I see, she said softly. Richmond didn't correct her. Brittany closed her eyes for a second, breathing through something internal, something real. When she opened them again, her gaze met Camille's, not sharp, not hostile. Human. I'm glad he has his mother, she said. Camille inclined her head slightly. So am I. Later, when a doctor came to speak with Camille, the conversation stayed careful. He's responding, the doctor said. That's good. The fever is coming down, slowly. We need to keep monitoring him. The next 12 hours will tell us more. Not certainty, but hope. Camille let out the breath she'd been holding since admission, just a fraction. Can I sit with him? She asked. Yes, the doctor replied, but only for a few minutes. As Camille stood, Richmond hesitated. I won't come in, he said quickly, not unless you ask. She paused, considering. Thank you, she replied, for understanding that boundaries didn't require cruelty, they required clarity. Inside the room, Camille sank into the chair beside Kyrie's bed and leaned forward until her forehead rested near his hand. She didn't speak, she just stayed. When she stepped back into the hallway, Richmond stood straighter, as if bracing for terms. We need to talk about what happens next, he said. Not now, not while he's here, but eventually, yes, Camille agreed. We will, and I need you to know something, he added. I'm not asking to be forgiven, I'm asking to be accountable. She studied him. The tone was different this time. No bargaining, no urgency. That starts, she said, with accepting that you don't get to decide your role immediately, if at all. He nodded. I accept that. Kyrie comes first, she continued. His stability, his sense of safety. If and when he learns more, It will be on terms that serve him, not you, not me. I understand. And I don't want secrecy layered on top of this, she added, not in ways that confuse him later, but the truth has timing. You don't force it to make yourself feel better. Richmond swallowed hard. I won't. She held his gaze. This isn't about punishment. I know, he said. It's about responsibility. Across the hall, Brittany slept again, her breathing more even. The machines continued their steady work. Kamel leaned back against the wall, the exhaustion catching up with her now that adrenaline loosened its grip. You loved her, Richmond said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, Kamel replied. I did. And you loved me, he continued. She considered that. I loved who you were when you didn't hide, she said. I grieved the rest. I wish, she raised a hand gently. Wishing doesn't build anything. He nodded again. I thought leadership meant protecting systems, he said. But systems don't feel abandoned when you hesitate. People do. That sentence would have meant nothing to him years ago. Now it carried weight. Power without courage, Camille said, creates distance where intimacy should be. He looked at her, recognizing the truth in it. And protection without honesty, she continued, creates silence that eventually becomes harm. They stood there as equals, not aligned, not opposed. Just clear. Hours passed in small increments. A nurse offered coffee. A doctor checked vitals. Kyrie stirred and settled again. At one point, Richmond stepped aside to take a call. When he returned, his phone stayed in his pocket. They can wait, he said. It was a small decision, but small decisions were where change began. As dawn approached, soft light filtering into the corridor, Kamel felt the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. She wasn't relieved, but she was steady. Richmond spoke again, voice low. If he never wants anything to do with me, if the answer is no for the rest of his life, I'll live with that. That's what accountability sounds like, Kamel said. And if he does? Richmond asked quietly. Then you show up, she replied, consistently, quietly, without expectation. He nodded. I can do that. She didn't promise him anything in return. Grace, she had learned, was not the erasure of consequence. It was the choice not to let bitterness make decisions for you. Forgiveness was optional. Boundaries were not. As the sun climbed higher and Kyrie's breathing remained steady, Camille allowed herself one small private moment of gratitude. Her son was fighting. The truth was no longer hers alone to carry, and the man who once walked away was finally standing still long enough to understand what that had cost. True leadership didn't begin in boardrooms. It began in moments where no applause followed. Only responsibility, and that understanding, hard-earned and overdue, was the real resolution. Not a fairy tale, but a foundation. Strong enough, perhaps, for something honest to be built upon, if patience, humility, and accountability continued to do the work. The morning didn't bring closure. It brought daylight. Sunlight crept through the high windows of the ICU corridor, pale and unassuming, as if the night hadn't demanded so much from everyone inside it. Nurses rotated shifts. Clipboards changed hands. Life resumed its careful rhythm. Kyrie slept on, his breathing steadier now, chest rising and falling without the frantic urgency that had terrified Camille hours earlier. There was no celebration in that quiet, only relief, cautious and contained. Camille stood beside his bed, brushing her thumb lightly over his knuckles the way she always did when she needed grounding. This moment didn't erase the fear that came before it, and it didn't guarantee what would come next, but it mattered. Across the hallway, Richmond spoke quietly with a doctor, his posture different from the man who had arrived the night before. Less controlled, more present. He listened without interrupting, asked questions without trying to steer the answers. When he caught Camille watching, he nodded once. Not as a claim, not as a request, simply acknowledgement. That was as close to peace as things came. They didn't talk about the past again that morning. They didn't revisit accusations or reopen old wounds that were still tender. Some truths, once spoken, didn't need repetition. They only needed time to settle. Camille gathered her bag, preparing for whatever the doctors advised next. Kyrie would be here a while. She would stay nearby. Showing up was something she already knew how to do. Before she left the room, she leaned down and whispered against her son's hair. I'm right here, she said. just like I promised." In the corridor, Richmond waited, careful not to block her path, careful not to assume conversation. "I'll respect whatever boundary you set," he said quietly. "Now and later." She studied him for a moment. "You already are," she replied. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was recognition. Life didn't grant clean conclusions just because people finally told the truth. Damage didn't disappear on cue. Love, even real love, didn't exempt anyone from consequence. But grace existed in smaller ways, in restraint, in responsibility, in showing up without expectation of reward. That was the work ahead, for all of them. Kamel stepped into the elevator feeling tired in a way that reached bone deep, but not hollow, not lost. She had carried the weight of truth alone for years. Now it was shared. That didn't make things easier. It made them honest. Honesty, she had learned, wasn't comfort. It was clarity. And clarity, even when it hurt, was a gift she wanted her son to grow up understanding. There would be difficult conversations one day, questions Kyrie deserved answers to, explanations that required kindness and care instead of defensiveness or shame. None of that would be rushed, because rushing had already cost them too much. What mattered now was this: a child was alive. A mother had protected him with everything she had. And a man who once confused safety with silence was finally learning what courage asked of him. No fairy tales, no sudden healing, just responsibility carried forward one decision at a time. And sometimes that was enough to build something real. If this story reminded you that truth always comes back and that love demands courage, subscribe to Mr. Williams' Storytime, because the stories we tell shape the lives we choose.